All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Spring Speaker Series for 2026 for the Society of American Archivists Student Chapter. Tonight, I'm delighted to introduce Emily Cabaniss, who is a business archivist. She's had a lot of experience in business archives as well as zines, publishing, SF opera, so many exciting opportunities to hear about. And I'm going to let her take it over from here. But welcome, Emily. Nice to have you. And just as a general speaking announcement, we are going to let Emily talk for a while, and then everyone will save up your questions because we will be having a Q&A panel. So we'll have a lot of opportunities to ask questions.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you. Let me start by sharing my slides. Okay. And we just practiced this, so I can totally pull it off. Okay. Hi, everybody. I am Emily Cabaniss. Rebecca, can you give me a thumbs up? Yeah, thank you. That's perfect. So I'm Emily Cabaniss. I am an archivist, and I'm going to talk with you all today, and I'm really looking forward to it. This is a filler slide. I'll move right on. Okay. So we have an agenda tonight. Um, the agenda is about me, and then we're doing choose your own adventure. So there is some context here. Originally, I was invited to speak with you all as a business archives consultant. I was an archivist for the Winthrop Group, which is an archival consulting firm based in New York. Um, since this talk was scheduled, I've left my work in the consulting firm and I have rejoined local government archives. So I'm not a working business archivist anymore, but that doesn't mean that I don't know quite a bit about business and product archives. Um, and I'm going to talk about my career and my background. And you'll notice when I do that my work is very broad in scope and type, that I've worked in a lot of different kinds of organizations. And I've done some nifty side projects and have some expertise there. And I want to speak with you all about kind of the reality of being in business archives and especially being in the private sector as an archivist. And so I'm offering choose your own adventure format for tonight. Um, no matter what, I'm going to give you an overview of my career and my work. And then we have some options. The first option is I can talk with you all a little bit about what a product archive is in business archives context. I'm going to talk about what business archives are, but especially product archives and their role in business. And then the second option is for me to talk with you all a little bit about negotiating, because I have done quite a bit of hiring of early archivists, early career archivists, and I have noticed that negotiation is not something that is part of the standard MLIS curriculum. And I think I have learned a lot over my 10 plus years career, and I wanted to offer some of my insights. No matter what, there will be a long Q&A. My plan is to only speak for probably about 10 minutes. And then take Q&A, and I am an open book for my Q&A. Feel free to ask me about anything. You can ask me about what we talk about, but you can also ask me about stuff that you're curious about from, kind of my career overview or anything else. And I know that Rebecca brought some extra questions too in case the questioning dies down, but I really want to be available as a resource to all of you. And yeah, so that's where we're going. And I figured people could kind of drop it into the chat what they were interested in seeing. But now that I'm sharing my slides, I'm realizing that I can't see the chat. So I'm wondering if anybody is noticing, if perhaps Rebecca's noticing.
So far,
Um,
the only
it
comment
leaning.
is, can we pick both? Which was my response as well. But
Yeah, that's fair. We could totally pick both. I think that that is a great idea, and I think I could do that. I haven't timed out both, but if it starts looking like 30 minutes, maybe I'll just be like, let's go to a Q&A from there. How does that sound?
that's perfect because that would still leave us half an hour, which is a generous amount of time to ask questions and get answers.
Okay,
If you feel that you can cover both, that sounds amazing to me.
let me see what I can do. I think I can talk about this.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then okay, can we do both? Of course. All right. First things about me, I mentioned this already. I'm Emily Cabaniss. I'm an archivist based in Seattle, Washington. That's where I'm from and where I grew up. Full disclosure, this headshot is not archival. It's me in my weaving studio. I was photographed recently for an art exhibition that's showing one of my woven tapestries, and I am trying to get as much mileage out of the pictures as I can. So I'm using them for everything. This is also the most recent photo of me, so that's good. Okay, so I'll talk first a bit about my career and background. I have a bachelor's degree in art history from the University of Puget Sound. I have a master's degree in library and information science that I earned from the University of Washington. I'm a first generation college student. My mother was a seamstress, and my grandmother was one of America's first women to apprentice as a plumber. So the blue collar family is what I come out of. And then I came into, yeah, bachelor's degree, master's degree, and became a librarian and archivist. Right out of school, my first job was as the librarian and archivist for Seattle Opera. The opera had not had that role in existence previously, so it also included some music administrative duties. I coordinated rehearsals and auditions in addition to my librarian and archival work. Um, I implemented the company's first library and archives program. I implemented their first ILS. I cataloged 12,000 scores, and I developed an archival program to collect, preserve, and make accessible the archival recordings and materials at the opera. So that included audio and video recordings. It also included materials like programs, photographs, marketing material, B-roll. Um, and taking care of all of those things, those things had been stashed. Away, but they hadn't been actively cared for. And I think that that was the first, but only the first of many times where I have worked in an organization where they had the stuff, but they didn't have the program. And that was the difference between the stuff and having an archive. Um, I was at the opera for 6 years. And yeah, while I was there, I launched a library and archive that served the musicians, educators, and creators that produced opera in Seattle. In 2020, I moved to King County Archives. King County is the county that Seattle is in. And I worked as an assistant archivist and then later as the county archivist. And the majority of my work at King County Archives was a lot more serious than the work I did at the opera. I worked there with a collection of notorious homicide files to preserve those records. I also created redacted record sets, and I provided regular reference access to the files, which were extremely high interest, especially to independent researchers and true crime producers. So that was the vast majority of my work there. It wasn't supposed to be the only part of my job, but the collection in question was of such high interest that it was the bulk of my job. This work planted the seed for my later work, developing guidance for archivists to create policies and workflows that acknowledge and affirm the dignity, humanity, and privacy of dead people in archival collections. And is what led to my later work, creating death positive lenses for archival practice. I worked at King County for 2 years before I joined an archival services consulting firm called Winthrop Group. The firm is based in New York City, and I was a lead archivist, and my role there was to manage projects scheduled in the Pacific Northwest and on the West Coast. And I worked with a variety of organizations in that role, and a lot of them were really similar to what I did for Seattle Opera. They were organizations that had stuff in a closet and they wanted to turn it into an archive. And so coming in and developing that program was a lot of what I did. But I developed a niche while I was there with product archives, which are the archives of businesses that include not only business records, but also the objects that the businesses produced. And those things could be actual product that was for sale at one point. It could be things like samples, design documents, swatches, mock-ups. And a lot of times those collections also held records of business activity, but their big draw was that they were a product archive. And most of my work in that context was with garment and textile products. Um, I have a certificate in textile conservation, and caring for textile collections in particular kind of became the skill that I was known for at my consulting firm. So I would get pulled into other projects quite a bit. And a lot of the work that I did was what we would describe as, I guess, advisory. So instead of doing hands-on collections care work for an organization, I would develop a kind of guide or best practice to improve the care of their textiles. So I would write them things like simple notes and guides, ways to train volunteer workers or interns, ways to train the archivists that they had on site who were not as familiar with textiles in particular, et cetera, et cetera. I can't talk about all of the clients that I had in that work. Some of them we signed NDAs with. One client that I did have that I can talk about and use a lot of examples from as a result is Pendleton Woolen Mills, which is based in Portland, Oregon. So caring for their product archive, which contained their full run of, well, we tried to have a full run of their blankets and garments, as well as piece goods and other materials that they made and business records. Very, very recently, like 2 weeks ago, I left the Winthrop Group and I returned to King County. And my role today is also a new role, a role that hasn't existed previously. I am a new archivist for the engineers of King County's wastewater treatment division, and I'm helping them manage their records. So I've been here for 2 weeks, and I'm excited because I can tell I have a lot to do. But this is a brand new chapter for me, and I don't have a lot to share about it, but it is exciting. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the product archive, and I'm going to talk about how it is material culture meeting business. What I wanted to talk about was what that archive does for these specific kinds of user groups. I think that when we talk about business records, we're often thinking about kind of the dry, like fiscal records, or records of communications, correspondence, etc. Um, but the product archive has a slightly different role. And some of that is because of, the nature of product being primarily non-textual documents, right? And so there is a collections care aspect that sometimes requires special expertise, but also there's a role in design. So the first thing is having your archive. And I've talked about this a bit, right? The idea that you have this stuff, but if you don't have the program, you don't have an archive. So a product archive is not just the stuff, it is the program around the stuff that's dedicated to its preservation, description, and access. And I've drawn this map, this kind of wheel, if you will, indicating the different kinds of groups that the archive interacts with. And then each line has text by it, and that describes the exchange between the archive and that group. So the first group that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go around this wheel like a clock, because when I was designing this wheel, I thought about these groups in this order. When I thought about who my top priorities were when I work in these archives, these were who my priorities, these were who the folks that I worked with the most were. So we'll talk first about the archive, right? And then the first group being the design. So in a product archive, in an ideal world, your product archive is something that is extremely accessible to in-house designers as well as collaborative designers. And there's an exchange of information there that happens early in the design process, where you are exchanging design background, technical information, and process documentation. The kinds of brands that have a product archive are brands that want to draw on their heritage and brands that want to draw on their past and historical products to inspire new work. They understand that their kind of, I guess, quote unquote, classic products can be referenced over and over again in their design. And it's not repetitive, it's just telling the story, it's putting their signature on things. And so in a product archive for a heritage brand, like Pendleton or like other brands that have archives like Levi, Nike, Coca-Cola, Patagonia, etc. Like, the designers are working directly with those archivists to create new stuff that still references that sort of past history. So the things that we exchange for the designers are technical information, design background, and process documentation. Technical information is often how the item was created. So things like, in the case of when I worked with Pendleton, we would provide information on the weave structures as well as the information about the dye formulas that were used in the products if we knew it. So if we had an object in our product archive, like a garment in our product archive that was made with a particular weave pattern, we would be documenting that, and our designers would come down and access our archive. And our designer questions could be things like, can I look at this coat from the 1935 season? Or they would be something really broad. They would say, I want to look at men's shirts from this decade. Or they would say, I want to look at men's shirts with this kind of pocket. And so we had to know all of that technical information about how these things were made, so that we could fulfill those needs. The other thing that we would give designers was design background. And so we would be giving that to them as a way to kind of help them see how previous designs have been developed, what they were referencing, so that they could use that in their tools. And then they would give that information back to us, right? It was an exchange. They would make stuff using what we had provided them, and then they would give it back to us. The other kind of major user of a product archive is marketing, right? And that can look like sales, like direct, consumer communication, like catalogs, photo shoots. We would send archival items out to photo shoots occasionally. Nobody was allowed to wear them, but they could be, posed, and product descriptions. So that was used in marketing. But the archive was also a tool for narrative development. We talked about heritage, and we talked about telling stories, and we talked about having this brand story. And the archives support that mostly through non-textual media, right? So if they want to make a blog post about the founder, the archives is who's pulling the photographs of the founder at the first mill, or an early work. And there's also I see I have a typo there. That's embarrassing. There's also a note. One other note from the archive is that a product archive can be used for reputation management. So when a brand is struggling with its reputation, whether that is earned or not, often they are earned, then the archive can be part of the way that a marketing team kind of shifts the story. And honestly, historical information can either be really good for reputation management. It could be this reminder that this brand has been around for a long time, and that, they have the resilience to stay around for a long time. It can also backfire. It can look like they're not taking a reputational issue seriously, or it can look like they're focused on the past because they can't be focused on the present right now. And so marketing and the archive work really closely together to figure out what is the kind of message we want to send by sharing archival material with our customers. And then on the other side of that, there's other kinds of users. There's legal records. And so the archive is also going to provide information about real property records, trademark enforcement, because if you don't defend a trademark, you lose it. So the archive keeps all of the records of trademark information and can support that. The other thing is things like residuals and royalties. So things like, I know of some brand archivists who have had to be really careful about sharing archival commercials because the actor in the commercial is still entitled to compensation if they show it somewhere. So working together back and forth with legal is part of a product archive as well. And then there's the relationship with enthusiasts. So those are people that are outside of the company that are huge fans of your brand. And they come in a couple of different forms, but the most interesting form is the collector. Every brand I know that has an archivist also has a third-party collector who enjoys a really good relationship with the company archivist because they often fill in gaps in each other's collections or understand things about each other's collections, that are really valuable. Enthusiasts can also be really valuable for a product archivist because they can do authentication and appraisal. Brands will often, not authenticate or appraise things that other people are collecting. But if I'm an archivist for a brand and I get a hold of something from Goodwill or eBay and I think it's authentic, I might want to have it authenticated and appraised by a collector who's authorized to do that. So that's an example of how the archive can have a relationship with enthusiasts about a brand. And other ways that they can interact with the enthusiasts. And what I've seen in brands is that the relationship with enthusiasts can either be really good or really bad or something in between. Ideally it's something in between. um, and then the last group that I wanted to talk about is founders and families, because this comes up all the time for me in family-owned business archives. They are very intertwined with the archive, even once the company has started to move away from family ownership. Even if that happens, that doesn't mean that the archives don't hold their personal family records and stories and objects. And that happens because when a brand is family owned, there is no distinction within the family between work and personal life. The correspondence becomes business correspondence in one paragraph and personal in the next, and it all gets really a gray area. So that's another group that the product archive interacts with. Okay, next slide. What should a business archivist be able to do? So I'm going to think about this in terms of the competencies of a business archivist. There is a baseline, core competencies of a general archivist, but I want to talk about some specific things that I notice business and product archivists do that other kinds of archivists don't necessarily do. The first thing is that you do need to have basic archival preservation and collections care skills, but in a corporate archive, in a brand archive, there is often the budget for specialists. And so I don't think that a business archivist needs to have a specialty in a particular kind of preservation or collections care. I think there is a budget to bring in conservators if you need that. There is a budget to use vendors if you need that. And so thinking about, what kind of skills you might develop as a future business archivist, I would not lean into collections care of a particular specialty unless you're interested in that. The other thing that I think is important is recognizing that these archivists conduct research on behalf of the archive's users, and they provide access to the materials if that's what's needed, like for designers who want to see things. Um, but in other kinds of repositories, archivists provide access to the materials, but they don't do the research. That is not the business archives way. If you are asked a question, you have to come back with the answer instead of the things that have the answer. So having research skills is really important for a business archivist. And then the other thing is knowing how to develop stories. And so it isn't just about having historical research skills, it's about having good storytelling skills too. It's about being able to make connections between items. It's about using outside research to develop context for the company's history and being able to tell stories in a compelling way. They need to be able to advocate to non-archivists, and they especially need to be able to advocate to executives on behalf of the archives. Every brand archive that has been successful ever has had somebody in the C-suite who cares a lot about it, and the archivist has been able to get their ear. I think that you will be recommended a lot of books and like writing and things like that on how to make a brand or business archive successful. And I actually think after my experience standing up archives for a lot of organizations, that the only thing that can make success possible, like the thing you have to have, is buy-in from upper management. You got to get it. It's not negotiable, and you have to be able to talk to non-archivists about your work, and you have to be able to quantify your work, which can be really difficult in archives. But you have to figure out what will quantify the work that you're doing, and you have to be able to document it, and you have to present it to leadership in the way that they want to see it. Because you have to justify your archive's existence. It is not like an archive that is government funded or an archive that is funded for research. It is helpful for the business, but it is not mission critical. And so the person who is a good business archivist needs to be a chameleon. They need to be able to make the case to whoever they're talking to, and they need to get the ear of somebody in leadership. I have found that a lot of times business archivists are often not actually trained archivists, especially in product archives. They're often people with some other kind of background in material culture. They might be a historian, or they might have some sort of background in history, and they function more like a company historian. They do that storytelling, that marketing, and they provide some access, but they don't do a ton of collections care work. They don't do a ton of collections management. But that role is still really important. And coming back to the thing about the business archivist has to have the ear of management, that is what gets that ear. And so that's a skill that you need to have. I have also noticed that in business archives with multiple staff, there's kind of a Bert and Ernie dynamic where some of them are more technical back-end archivists, and then the other one is like the face of the archives. I always think about Bert and Ernie and like their kind of seriousness versus, friendliness and whimsicalness. That is the presentation that I often see as like a breakdown. And I think that it is really important that they're able to be good storytellers. They get called on to do public speaking, they get called on to give tours, and they get called on to do social media a lot. And it's happening more and more that the archivists are not in a product archive, especially the archivist is part of the show. So, okay, so those are my two slides about business and product archives. I'm ready to move on to talking a little bit about job hunting. And I kind of think maybe we could do the Q&A with everything afterwards. Does that sound right, Rebecca?
Perfect.
Okay, that's cool. I'll keep moving then. Great. Okay. Enter the Thunderdome. So the first thing I want to say is that it is unprecedentedly rough out there. I mean, I know that you all know that, and I know that, but I have a 10+ year career, and so I have kind of a different perspective on job hunting right now. If you're intimidated, if you're uncertain, yeah, you should be, and that's totally normal. It's one of the worst markets I've ever seen. So I wanted to talk with you all a little bit about interviewing and negotiating. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because while I worked in that consulting firm, I hired a ton of early career archivists for short-term contracts with the goal of kind of getting them set up to do a short-term contract. They would do entry-level work, often technician level work, and then the contract would end and they would move on. And one of the things that I tried to do to make it more palatable that the contract was going to end is set them up for success in their job hunting for after the contract ended. So I would do resume review and cover letter assistance for my own employees just to make sure that they could get somewhere good. And I wanted that for them. And I also did a ton of hiring. I screened a ton of resumes. I had a lot of conversations. And this section is about what I think entry level archivists need to know based on my experience interviewing them and negotiating with them. Okay, so first thing is going to be some notes for interviewing. Entry level roles are entry level for a reason. So if you're an entry level archivist and you're interviewing in an entry level role and you get asked a question you don't know the answer to, that's okay. It's okay to not know everything in the interview. What I want to hear when I'm interviewing an entry level archivist is not that they know everything. And I've been in this profession for a long time, and if you try to convince me that you know everything, I'm going to know if you're lying. So just tell me if you don't know stuff, but then tell me how you'd figure it out. That's all I want to hear. And my expectations for entry level archivists are entry level. I don't know other archivists who have a different perspective. And so I think that that's one thing I really wanted to make sure I communicated to you all as, yeah, these you know, early career archivists is making sure that you know that you don't have to make stuff up. If you don't know something, it's okay. Second thing is to have questions for your interviewers. I don't mind if I interview someone who doesn't have questions, but I do like if they have good questions. And I will share a question that I ask when I interview that sometimes gets, wow, what a great question. And then you can all have that in your back pocket, which is what is the difference between a good candidate and a great candidate for this job? That's something that I ask in my interviews, and it gets a lot of interesting answers. And the answer to that question often is going to tell you a lot about the work culture. And I think that that's something you want to think about. And then the last thing is following up with care. I'm a pretty clear communicator. And so I'll tell you, like, when I'm planning to follow up, I'll tell you that I'm going to follow up either way, and I always do. If you follow up one time. I promise that I am not going to forget that I'm hiring right now. So there's always lots and lots of pieces happening when it comes to hiring. And one of the things that can make a candidate look really out of touch to me is if I get a follow up, like, when do you expect to have a decision? Like 2 days after, if I told you I was going to wait a week to make a decision, et cetera, et cetera. So just be mindful of the context where you're following up in. Okay, so those are my notes for interviewing. I don't have a ton of other notes for interviewing because I think it's really varies depending on where you're trying to get into, right? Like when I was hiring for this firm, it was very ad hoc, right? It was just me with the contract. I'd screen the resumes, I'd do the phone screeners, I'd do the full interview. If you're going through a system with a more robust HR personnel, you're going to have a different interview experience. If you're going through a system where you might work with a group of archivists instead of one archivist, Totally different experience. So I don't feel like I can give it a lot of generalizations for interviewing. But I do want to talk about negotiating because we have to get paid, right? Okay, so there's 4 ways to get more money, right? And the best way to get more money is to get organized, which is to say get in a union, or join a work group that is organized, which is to say a work group that has a union. That's the best way. Collective bargaining is your best friend. The second best way to get more money is to change jobs. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of that in a minute. Um, but the third best way to get more money is to negotiate at the job offer, with the caveat that for some kinds of employment, the salary is going to be fixed, right? So government employees often have like a very fixed like window of salary. There's other kinds of employees where that's not an option. And the reason why those two are separate, second and third, is because you can change jobs and get more money without negotiating. But then you could also negotiate and get even more money. And then the last way to get more money is to ask for a raise. This is the hardest way because it is really challenging to go to somebody that you talk to every day who's responsible for your work and ask them for a raise without bringing a ton of documentation. And in my experience with employers, if you have to ask for a raise, it gets really hard to get a raise. They are often reluctant to give it to you. If you get regular cost of living increases and other kinds of increases, it's easier to ask for a raise. But I want to talk a little bit about negotiating. Okay, next slide. Okay, negotiating solo 101. So when I was a kid, my dad was really invested in me learning how to like fight and do self-defense. And he always would say, if you're in a fight, you've already messed up. And so what I want to say is the easiest way to get money is to be organized or in a workplace that is organized. If you're negotiating solo, collective bargaining is your friend. Don't negotiate solo if you can help it, right? Just saying that out loud. And then here's what matters the most. And these thoughts that I'm sharing on negotiating are just based on my experience negotiating, especially with early career archivists and people who are really early in their careers in general. And my experience both negotiating at the job offer level and negotiating raises, both for myself and having people ask me for raises. Here's what matters the most. It's the market rate for your position, because that's what a negotiation is a conversation about. It's about what your work is worth. So you need to be realistic about your comparables and about your position. And what I mean by that is that if you are an archives tech for a role that doesn't require an MLIS, and then you earn an MLIS, can you ask for a raise to an MLIS comparable salary if you're still doing work that doesn't require it? Or do you need to actually be having a conversation about changing your job entirely? Whether that means finding a new job somewhere else or getting reclassified, as it were. So be realistic about your position and your comparables. If your skill set has outgrown the position, you will probably not get more money. The other thing is to look for comparables. You have to have comps when you come to a negotiation. You have to find listings, and you don't have to apply to them, but you should because it's good practice. You don't have to apply to them, but you have to have listings for positions that are similar to what you're doing, that require certificates or niche experience that you have, that reflect your current work, and look at what they're earning. And if they're earning what you're earning, your negotiation is probably not going to be super successful. You have to be looking for the comps. The other tool that I use a lot is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it does drill down to regional data. So if you live in a high cost of living area, then it can be easier to find those comps and also to get a sense of what kind of the market rate is. But just always remember when you're negotiating that it's not personal, it's a conversation about the market rate for your position, right? Um, Here's the things that don't matter so much: how much money it costs for you to live and how much money the organization has. And those go both ways. So what I mean by that is that your organization, your employer cannot tell you that since you don't have kids, you don't need to make as much as your coworker, right? It also means that if you have a huge house payment, you can't ask for more money because you have a huge house payment. That's not what your negotiation should be about. It goes the other way too, right? If your organization's revenue is really minimal and they tell you, I'm sorry, things are so tight this year, I don't think we can pay you the market rate for your position, that's not your problem. It's not your problem that they can't afford you, right? But it goes the other way too, where if they made a ton of money this year, but the market rate for your position is not higher than what you're making right now, that's a hard case to make. But there are other, there are exceptions to that, right? Like there are cost of living questions, there are revenue questions. And there is a question of equitable salary, right? So if your organization is not transparent about their salaries, I think that having conversations with your coworkers about salary is a really important thing, because it gives you an opportunity to go to your workplace and say, equitable salary is necessary here. And then I wanted to talk about floors and ceilings. Okay, so when we talk with negotiations, before you negotiate a job offer or a raise, but especially if you're talking about a job offer, having a floor is totally fine. You can say this is the minimum that I'll leave for. That's normal. Having a ceiling, I think, is also normal. If you don't like negotiating or you don't want to negotiate, I think it's okay to have a number in your head that you'll just say, I'll accept this position if they give me this number and I won't drag out a negotiation. Like, always go for it. But you don't have to. So I think it's okay to have a floor and to have a ceiling of like, yeah, I'll take this without negotiation. I also have noticed sometimes early career folks will take a position or will resist taking a position because they think the salary is too low, but they don't actually have other options. I just want to say out loud, you can take a position and keep looking. It's not a big deal. And it really like turns into a drop in the bucket in your career. So I just wanted to say that too. Um, and I think one of the things I wanted to say about the kind of negotiating that I'm talking about, and
I'm going to interrupt fast. You
yeah,
said 20 minutes to the end of the hour.
okay, thank you. See, I couldn't combine them, but I could almost combine them. I got really close. Okay, last thing I'm going to say is that I had an employee who left for a better offer, and I said something to her that I also wish that someone had said to me when I was early in my career. Um, she was really worried that everybody was mad at her for leaving, and I said, nobody is mad at you. But even if everybody was mad at you, that would not change the fact that you have to do what's best for you. So when you're negotiating, I want you all to think about that. Even if everyone's mad at you for negotiating, who cares? You have to do what's best for you. Okay, let's go to the Q&A.
Thank you so much. This is perfect. We just had a session on internships the other week, so this is a perfect segue into like real life job searching, very practical approach.
Good. Great.
Please, people, put your questions in the chat. While we're waiting, I will do my question, which is how much of your work has been remote? I heard you say you were working for Winthrop, which is across the country, and
Yeah.
you were head of a local area, and I'm wondering if that was an option.
Yeah. So I technically worked remote for Winthrop, but I was on client sites a lot of the time. So at least once a week, I was on a client site. The rest of the time, I was I was in my house. I had a co-working space for a little bit, but I was on calls there. Other than that, very little of my work has been remote. When I worked at King County with the notorious homicide files, once they were digitized, I was able to do most of my redaction and reference remotely. And so I did work remotely for that. But yeah, hands-on collections care is in-person work. So, and that's the majority of the work that I've done.
All right, second quick question. Do you look for positions that are called product archivist as opposed to business archivist? Because I've never seen that delineated in that way before.
No, I don't I haven't seen it delineated that way either, but that's the way that but I think it's an important delineation because I think that it does require a different sort of skill set and approach to the collections. And you know, just speaking really practically, it requires a different kind of space. It's like it's a different square footage when you're doing
Yeah,
a product
absolutely.
archive. And so, yeah, no, I don't see those, but I want people to start saying that.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting a lot of questions. So here we
Okay.
go. Let me go up to the top. Let's see. First question. I plan to visit many museums in person, ask if any internships are available instead of emailing them. What do you think of this plan?
You can ask, but it probably won't work. Sorry. Yeah.
So email's just as good and
Yeah,
situation.
I would email, and I think an email is more likely to get to the right person. I think if you go visit, like a visitor desk at a museum, I mean, small museums, you might end up talking to the archivist, but any museum with a reception desk, I don't think that that will work.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
I would send emails.
Okay, next question. They're curious about conservation certifications.
Yeah.
Tell us a tiny bit more about your earned textile cert.
Yeah, I did my textile cert through the Northeast Document Conservation Center. It was taught by Ann Coppinger, who was the head of the museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology. Incredible experience. It was like I think 8 weeks long, and I just had this little cohort. Mostly, it was museum curators who found textiles in their collection and didn't know what to do. I was the only product archivist in the group, and it was so fun, and I learned so much, and I just loved it. So
Mhm.
highly recommend if you are interested in anything to do stuff through NEDCC.
All right, next. Should I join the SAA? Obviously, I'm going to say yes because we're the student
Yeah.
chapter. But what do you say, Emily?
Well, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to say if you have to pick, I think that your regional archives association is a great opportunity. I
Okay.
don't think you should pick. I think you should do both if you can. But I was on the board of Northwest Archivists for a long time, and it was so enjoyable and a great networking opportunity locally. So
The next follow-up question was, what certificates would you recommend? I think you addressed that a little bit.
yeah, and I do think that the digital archive specialist certificate through SAA is something that employers are looking for right now.
Excellent, excellent. Let's see. Would you recommend working someplace like Winthrop as an early career archivist to gain experience?
Okay, so this is the part where I don't work for Winthrop anymore, so I can be really candid about that. As
Please
an early
do.
career archivist, I think taking a short-term contract is a great way to get a gig done. And I think that these, kind of short-term contracts are a great way to learn a lot. I do not recommend getting embedded into leadership in these archival service firms because of various reasons, but mostly because it does turn into, corporate consulting at the end of the day. And yeah,
So I'm curious, when you say short-term contracts, that
yeah,
sounds really appealing. I'm imagining that's as a solo or entrepreneur archivist as opposed to joining a corporation 9 to 5 kind of a situation, right?
bingo. Yeah, a lot of times it's a part-time contract or it can be a very short full-time contract. It's to get something done. It can
Yeah.
be to support an existing archive. They might say we're doing a collections move. We need a cataloger temporarily, or we need someone to process this collection that came in. It can also, I also had, yearly contracts with clients where we had an archivist on site with a yearly contract and it just renewed every year. They just liked the yearly contract model. So,
So I work in the Bay, or I live in the Bay Area, and I don't
yeah.
see a ton of opportunities like that. Do you think that's a regional? It just sort of depends where you live and what you find. For
Yeah, I think it depends. I think that one thing that I've noticed is that those consulting firms do not seem to be very active in California. I don't know why, but the Bay Area is not a place that either Winthrop or our competitors really seemed able to break into ever. So I don't see it a lot in the Bay Area. I do see it in the rest of the country. So
all
could be
right,
regional.
all of you
Yeah.
out there in Colorado, New Mexico, and other places, good on
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Let's see. What's a typical day week for an archivist from start to finish?
From start to finish.
Question.
I mean, you got three tasks, right? You got reference, description, and processing. And for me, my sort of order of operations is always reference first because that's how you make the case for your archives. And then description because that's how people find stuff and makes reference easier. And then processing and collections care. So if I walk into a day and I have a long-term project, I'm gonna drop everything for reference. Probably spend half my day on description, probably spend half my day on processing. The higher up you get in archives, the more time you spend in meetings.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay, excellent. Let's see. Yes, someone mentioned, yeah, we did put something in the introduction about your work with archives and death and grief, and someone
yeah.
asked to expound on that a bit.
Yes, I'm happy to. So, I I have been developing guidance for sensitive records since the work that I did with homicide files that turned into a presentation that I gave last year at Northwest Archivists called What Can Archivists Learn from Death Care Workers? And a proposed death positive lens for accessioning access policies and our professional culture. And since we do have a lot of questions, what I'm going to do instead of answering that question in depth, because I would love to, is I'm going to drop a podcast that I went on about it,
You.
if that's okay.
Yes, that
I
sounds
went on this podcast that's hosted by a death doula named Jill McClellan it's called Seeing Death Clearly, and I talk a little bit about the work that I did, what inspired it, and at the time I was about halfway through my death doula interviews. So, yeah,
Amazing. Awesome. Yeah, that'd
Mhm.
be fantastic. All right. Comments saying this has been fantastic and thank you. What are some technical skills you think new grads should have? And would you mind talking a bit about the work you did? Oh, death positive lenses. Well, you just
Yeah.
did. So what technical skills do you think new grads should have?
I think that this is probably not something that everybody will say, but I think that the hands-on conservation skills are becoming rarer, and I like to see new grads have that. It's so hard to get that though, so I hate to tell you all like, yes, go out and get technical skills and like bookbinding, because that's a really hard skill to gain in person. I do think that having some niche, tangible object conservation is an important skill. It's an AI proof skill, and it's a skill that shows me that you can be trusted with archival objects, which is really important. So,
Let's see. Thank you everyone for your questions. This is great. Let's see. Regarding contract work, how common is it to pursue this route long term? Variety is very important to me, and your resume is dreamy, which I have to second.
thank you.
Absolutely. The scope and the different types of work you've done is amazing.
I appreciate that. I've loved my career, like honestly, every minute of it, and I just really enjoy my work a lot. I don't think it is super common. I mean, at some point you say, I want healthcare, I want a pension. I mean, I've come back to the government, I want the pension. But I think that the variety is there, and I think that the archivists that do that work, they do find work. You do have to like you got to develop some business, so you have to be good at like selling a little bit, and you have to be willing to do that. And even when I was with a firm, like I had to do that. And that is not right for every personality, but if it's right for you, then I think that you can be successful doing it because I don't know. I think that that variety is really valued for those kinds of people, and I think that they're able to make it happen. So not common, but not ridiculous either.
Excellent. Excellent. Just circling back really quickly on what you were saying about conservation care. Does that in your if you were interviewing, is it the ability to work carefully with
Yes.
records, or is it actually conserving them and repairing them and things like that?
Yeah, I just want to see an ability to work carefully. I don't expect, if I'm hiring for an entry level position, I don't expect them to tell me that they like restored anything. That's not experience that I expect to see. It's more that I'm looking for experience that they have with handling objects. That's something that I like to see quite a bit.
Thank you for that distinction. Okay, let's see. What are some of the biggest differences between working for government archives and corporate archives or art heritage archives organizations like the opera? So let's wide swath.
Yeah. Well, here's what I'm going to say about government archives. The thing about government archives and the thing about government records is that if people don't keep them, they get in a lot of trouble, ideally. Um, And that makes your job a lot easier because it's not in a conversation about why we need to have an archive. It's a conversation about how we're going to have an archive, which is so much more fun to me. And so you're not doing this constant advocacy for the fact that the archive needs to exist. In my state, it's the law that the archive needs to exist and that we need to be able to respond to records requests in a certain amount of time. And so our bare minimum staffing is something that can do that. Um, Whereas corporate archives or arts organizations, cultural arts organizations, you have to always be making the case for the archive to exist at all, which was really hard for me when I was early in my career because people would say, well, why do we need an archive? And, I just finished my MLS. I'd say, are you kidding? And you needed to know how to talk about that. Whereas in government archives, that's never a conversation on the table. So that's really the best part and the biggest difference.
Excellent. Yeah, you're not going to be presenting to stakeholders. It's much
Yeah,
more.
exactly.
Let's see. Here's a comment. It does not, it says, wonder if it's for about California laws around freelancing and gig work. So I
That
don't,
would be my guess. Yeah, that's a really good insight.
okie doke. Oh, and then you put your podcast in. Thank you.
I
Thank you.
did. Yeah.
What is the most challenging or worst thing about being an archivist?
Historians that think that they're archivists.
Ooh,
Yeah.
okay.
Because I work so often with organizations that have had this stuff for a long time but have not had the archive for a long time, I find myself undoing the work of very well-intentioned historians
Mm,
who really thought that it was okay to have 25 Excel spreadsheets with a bunch of virtual collections that were not identified as such. It is the biggest headache. It makes me furious. And that is the worst thing about being an archivist. Your predecessor is the worst thing about being an archivist.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have time for a couple more questions, and that's the end of the list. So I'll just keep asking questions until someone else asks. How was it when you started at the opera as approaching a historical institution and you're fresh out of school and you had no predecessor? That's what made me think of it. It's like there's no
Yeah. It
staff
was
of.
crazy. I was 23 years old and I was like telling all these people, well, you guys spend this money. And I can't believe in hindsight that that happened. And I think that that happens a lot with organizations that have never had an archivist. They don't understand how professional it is. So they really will hire somebody right out of school.
Mm,
Um, they're excited to get it started, but they don't know what they need. And then you sit down and you say, well, you need this, this, and this. And then they, the money starts to talk and then they don't like that so much. So I really worked on a shoestring budget, but in terms of starting, man, I had to get so much buy-in from, people with the institutional knowledge at the opera to start to build up. And then I think the thing that really got the snowball rolling was when I digitized the VHS tapes at the opera. And we didn't have the budget for a vendor, so I did it in-house. We did have a VCR. And I asked them for a capture card, and I got a capture card. And then some of the tapes needed to be baked, which is I'm not going to get too far into this, but baking tapes is a preservation method. And I didn't have any tools to bake the tapes, but I had found this forum post about how you could bake tapes using a hairdryer and a cardboard box.
mhm.
So I set up, and like we had an oven at the opera, but it like smoked every time someone used it, and so I wasn't going to use that for the tapes. So I set up a hairdryer in a cardboard box. I got it at Goodwill, and I baked all my tapes and preserved them that way. And people would walk by and see me sitting with the hairdryer and a meat thermometer and go, "What's in there?" And I'd say, "Archives, baby." And it was crazy. It is crazy that I got away with that. But also I did, and I think that I think that my willingness to just show how the backstage magic happened of preservation, people love that stuff. And
That
I
is,
think also my kind of undauntedness
yeah.
in continuing. And I don't know. I don't know if I would put up with that now. If I would put up with them saying like, no, we can't afford to digitize this, like good luck. But at the time I was so early in my career that I was like, okay, I'll go get a hairdryer then. And I kept the hairdryer. I don't use it, obviously. So
Oh, that's a great story.
yeah.
Okay, so
Um,
I've got a couple more
yeah,
questions.
yeah.
Do you process records requests yourself, or is that done
Mm.
by another team member? And how common is it to have unions outside of government?
Yeah. So if you work for the government, the records processors take care of that for you, but you do compile the records for them. When I worked for the King County Archives, that was a public facing agency, so I did interact with the public directly in that case. Um, but if you work in the back end like I do now, if we get a public records request that I have responsive records to, the request organizer will come to me. I'll give them the records. They interact with the public. So I don't interact with the public anymore. Great. Union work. Yeah, the local governments up here are organized. More and more academic institutions are organizing. The University of Washington librarians just organized. I have heard of some organization efforts elsewhere in the country. It is possible. Groups that I recommend, do you mean like unions to be in? Or I'm not sure what that means. Like organizations to work for that are organized. Um,
Work groups.
yeah. Oh, work groups. Yeah, I mean, I think that looking, first of all, I think that if you work in an institution that is not organized, but you know somebody who is in an organized group, talk to them about how they got organized and who they're organized under, because you can organize under a union that might not seem like it's for archivists, right? Like last time I worked at the county, I was a Teamster. Um, the UW organized under SEIU, which is the nurses union. Like a lot of times a big union will have lots of different kinds of skill sets and specialties. So, and if you're in an organization and you want to think about getting organized, find out who your Teamsters local is and contact them and say, hey, I'm interested in this, or at SEIU, or what are other people doing? Because it's collective bargaining, it's a coalition, and they'll happily help you. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so 2 minutes left, and we've got a few more questions. I want to be
hmm
respectful of your time. So,
Yeah.
uh, how hard is it to get a government archive job?
Hard. It's hard.
Okay.
They just don't open up very often, and the pension is appealing. I what I've learned is that if you notice a government archive with a lot of turnover, that's probably really, really bad. Um, yeah, so it is tough, but swing for it every single time.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Beginning of MAR program, are there outside of hands-on skills, are there any courses or topics you would recommend?
Yes, I think that one of the most important courses that I took in library school was a cataloging course. And when I worked at the opera, I brought in interns and I taught them cataloging, and I noticed a drop off in their understanding of records, bibliographic records. And I got so mad about it that I wrote to the UW and I said, you guys are sending me interns that don't know stuff about cataloging anymore. And they felt so sorry. They said, well, I went and met with like the chair of the program. Um, but I think that cataloging skills are so important. Even if you think you don't want to be a cataloger, you need to know how that backend works. You don't have anything if your backend doesn't work. And so I think that respect and appreciation for cataloging and bibliographic and metadata management is essential. So that is my recommendation.
Thank you. We have one more question. It is at the hour.
I'm fine.
Okay.
I'll take more questions. I'm having fun.
Oh, excellent. Oh, thank you so
Yeah.
much. We're at the
Yeah.
hour for anyone who needs to go. This is recorded. But what do you look for in resumes when you're hiring entry-level archivists?
I
Besides catalog.
don't yeah. I mean, yeah, cataloging. No, I think what I really want to see in an entry level archivist, like no experience at all, I want to see something that indicates that they are prepared to handle collections with care, to work mindfully, and to work period. And I think about this a little bit too because I'm on a scholarship committee for one local organization here in Seattle. I think something that I look for, if you don't have a ton of work experience and you're going to give me outside work experience, I want to see work experience where you have some accountability.
Ah, interesting.
So, what I mean by that is that I don't want to hear that you run a blog with 10 of your friends
Hmm.
because there's not accountability there. I do want to hear that you volunteer for a 501(c)(3) or established organization that has a volunteer shift in schedule and that you showed up on time and you did what you said you were going to do with a smile on your face. Um, and I think about this a lot because I do look at resumes from people without very long work experiences, and I don't need to see a ton of work experience, but I do need to see some experience with being held accountable. Um, and showing up on time and doing what you say you're going to do. And so that's my recommendation. That's what I'm going to look for on a resume with nothing else on it. But
Yeah,
I'm not going to throw out a resume that doesn't have anything on it necessarily. So just to say that out loud.
absolutely. And yeah,
Yeah.
soft skills are so important, communication skills and
Yeah.
accountability. Okay, next up, this person is a pretty social person, but archiving is known for being for introverts. What has your experience been?
I'm so glad that you asked about this because I am obviously a yapper. My experience has been fine. I do great. It has been hard for me to be in academic environments. I'm going to just say that, like, really frankly, I don't always mesh in repositories with a ton of archivists in them because it is a pretty introverted profession. Um, I do want to say, okay, now I am going to come back a little bit to like death conversations. I think one of the things that was so important for me to share when I started talking about death positivity in archives and the idea of affirming the dignity, humanity, and privacy of dead people in our archives was recognizing that this profession seems like it is not a people profession, but this is a deeply relational profession. It's just that the people you interact with most of the time are dead. We are constantly reading and caring for and stewarding the records of people, and we're taking care of things that matter to people. This is relational work. And if we think about this work as not relational, then we get really burned out. So you have to understand that you can be social, and you can be introverted and interested in archives, and you don't have to be on all the time to work in archives. But if you think that you're not going to be interacting with people in this profession, you're 100% wrong. You're going to be interacting with people all the time, and you will develop this really weird parasocial relationship with them because you have read all of their diaries and you will never meet them and they will never know that you existed. So not only is this relational, but it's also relational in a super weird way. And I'm a social person, I'm a yapper, and I'm super nosy. And that weird parasocial relationship has worked out for me. Um, but yeah, don't worry about it. And when you are kind of social, when you are like really gregarious, a lot of times you end up being kind of like social glue in your like professional network in a way that everyone really values. So I don't know. It's okay. It's been fine for me.
Oh, that's a great answer. And
Yeah.
I will second something you said early on. I've seen a number of job descriptions recently where archivists are responsible for doing tours, new employee onboarding, all kinds of things that require speaking skills. So that's important, even if you're an introvert or an extrovert.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let's see. I want to know everything about contract work, same. What tips do you have for getting in the door? Any chance we might get a short time contract before graduating? That's a quick answer, yes. Aside from Winthrop, what are some of the more well-known companies with a good reputation? Whoa, that's
Um, no, that's a ton of questions. What tips do you have for getting in the door? I think keep applying. I know, I always saved resumes if I didn't hire somebody, and I had a couple of people that I hired that I hadn't hired in an initial round, and then I needed something else, and I remembered those resumes. So keep sending in resumes. Um, Aside from Winthrop, what are some of the most well known? Heritage Works, History Factory, those are both really well known. I can't remember if it's History Factory or Heritage Works. One of them is a very sports like focused organization. So if you're interested in sports history, and sports archives, I think that can be really interesting. Dallas Cowboys archivist has a bunch of disgusting socks in his collection, something to think about before you get involved in sports archives. Um, I think the other option, right? I see a lot of people like doing gig work on their own, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I do think that letting the firm negotiate the contracts and things like that early on is a really good way to like learn the ins and outs of how contract work like looks. It's a little bit different, and I think that getting a sense of what the market rate is for contract work, because people will pay more for contract work than they will pay you directly. So thinking about that, like going through a firm is probably a good idea to get started and looking for those short-term contracts.
excellent, excellent. That is the end of our questions. So I will say thank you so much. This has been
Thank you.
really educational, and I really appreciate you being here. This is really great. You
Thank
are
you.
our first business archivist to speak with us. So,
That's so funny because I feel like I'm really not a business archivist.
well, your take on things has been unique. So I really
Thank
appreciate.
you. I believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.